you have a very nice looking studio behind
Thanks,
you.
man. Thank you very much. I actually built it at my house about 12 years ago, and I've been recording bands for most of my life at this point. I think about 18 years. So it's
Um,
it just made sense to have it at home. That way I could just constantly work because it takes a lot of work to do it. So
yeah, that's fantastic. It seems amazing. Like having studio at home, are you like, have you experienced this sort of paradox when it comes to the whole situation of having your work at home in terms of productivity and in terms of, just meshing the two mentalities in terms of being at home and being at work? And do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Uh,
I know exactly what you mean. That was a little tough at the beginning because, I tend to be like obsessive compulsive, especially when it comes to
yeah,
audio.
yeah,
So it was tough for me to turn off my brain and shift gears from work life to home life.
yeah.
But, I designed the studio to look completely different from the rest of the house. The studio is red and really bold, and the rest of the house is like green and gray. So and I've kind of just made a pact with myself. Whenever I'm done for the day, I turn everything off, shut the door,
Yeah,
and I'm done. So I just, I've learned how to make that transition pretty well.
that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned, something very interesting in terms of, having obsessive compulsive tendencies and stuff like that. And I very much relate with that. So I really want to, to ask you about that as well. Like, do
Sure.
you have this sort of moments where, you might have, finished working for the day and you might be, at the whole part of your day, and do you have this moment like, oh, I really need to fix that, or I really need to tweak that in this session
Oh
that
yeah.
I did? And
Yeah.
like,
Like, for example, like that snare drum is driving
yeah,
me crazy and you just can't get it out of your head. And so, I mean, sometimes it'll drive me a little crazy, but I've learned to basically take my time, and like whenever my work time is going on, like I do my
mhm,
work then, and whenever I'm done, I leave it because if you go too hard, too long, you end
mhm,
up losing productivity, and it ends up taking longer to do the project ultimately.
mhm,
So I've learned the diminishing returns law. I've
mhm.
learned kind of where to draw the line, be like, nope, I think we're done for today. So
Yeah.
it's just, but it has been a learning experience for sure. I mean, early on in my career, I was, working way too much and very frustrated because of the fact, you're working too much. You don't have, your ears aren't fresh. You don't have the energy to continue
Yeah.
to keep going. And ultimately the product suffers. So I've just kind of learned that balance.
Yeah, I definitely can agree that it's quite the experience and the learning curve to sort of want to overcome, your initial instincts, especially when you realize that they're not very beneficial towards what you do. Uh,
Absolutely.
but what would you say is like, the most difficult and most challenging transformation that you've experienced in this field in terms of changing yourself and changing your instincts towards doing what you do, or whatever aspect of it might be, you
Wow.
know
There's so many facets that go into recording, from, pre-production all the way to mixing and mastering and everything in between. And there's an infinite amount of variables in between
Mhm,
those spaces.
mhm,
So whenever I started my career, I was really trying to be scientific with it, as
mhm,
in like, okay, always boost here, always cut here, always compress
mhm,
this much, always automate, And so
mhm,
I was trying to follow all these scientific rules, and it ultimately ended up being more frustrating than anything because the product wasn't sounding how I wanted it to sound in my head, or
mhm,
comparing it to another major release.
mhm,
And I was frustrated. And whenever I kind of started to make the transition from treating it like a science and more like an art form,
mhm,
as in like, don't be afraid to break those rules,
mhm,
and as soon as I started to do that and get way more creative and let a little bit of that
mhm,
control go,
mhm,
it became way more fun. And then just everything started to sound better and gel better together. And I think the artists that I have worked with through the years are ultimately happier, and I'm ultimately happier as well. But that would probably be the biggest learning curve for me, is going from that scientific mentality. Now you have to learn the rules, but
mhm.
I think I was afraid to break them in the
Uh-huh.
process. So now it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to turn uh, 8K up 12 dB on the snare drum. Like there's no law that says I can't do that. If it sounds good, I'm going to do it and roll with it. And you know, that momentum, I think, and that creative impulse is just contagious.
Yeah, yeah, you put it so well. And, you know, it's so interesting to hear your perspective on this because, especially in terms of mentality, I know, you know, that we spoke for just a few minutes, but I'm just hearing a lot of things that I can relate with in terms of, you know, you said that you initially been very scientific. Obviously, you know, you've mentioned, I guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you're quite the perfectionist when it comes to things that you're working on.
Oh yes.
And you know, I would love to hear your perspective on this because, you know, being this sort of a personality myself, and especially when it comes to, you know, establishing career in music, I found it very difficult when I was younger. Obviously, you know, I've tried to be in a band and I tried to go to that route in terms of being a musician, but
Right.
I've never been able to sort of um, overcome this, you know, this instinctive state of mind where I have a specific, you know, idea in terms of how things need to be done and how things need to sound and how things need to evolve. And I
Mm-hmm.
found it very difficult to compromise that and sort of comply with other people that are involved into this process. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, and I would speak to that like um whenever I'm producing a band. So I'm not, you know, an artist who is in the band, you
Yeah.
know, because I'm a guitar player.
Mhm.
But if I'm just producing a band, then I tell them, I was like, guys, like you're here to work with me because you know, I've done this for a long time and I have a very specific like set of expectations and I have you know, a very crazy work ethic sometimes. And I always allow my artists, you know, full creative control, but I always like to steer them in the direction of where I hear the project going, you know, as far as my vision is concerned for how I want it to sound, and then taking their vision and trying to meet and compromise in the middle. And sometimes that road to get there can be a little, you know, dicey,
Mhm.
but I think that there's a trust that has to be established between
Mhm.
the artist and myself as a producer. And you know, I don't just take any client. I really want to get to know the band that I'm working with or the
Mhm.
artist that I'm working with, try to establish that working relationship before we even jump in and start recording,
Mhm.
because I want to know how it's going to be whenever I say, hey, that should be an A instead of an E,
Yeah.
or that take is out of tune, or let's use this snare drum. I want to know if there is going to be like pushback, or you know, if there's going to be like that malleability, if that's a word, if
Yeah.
there's going to be like flexibility
Yeah.
with how they feel about their art and their music.
Yeah.
So typically, man, it's been pretty easy, honestly,
Mhm.
because I run a really like tight ship in the studio and I drive really hard.
Mhm.
And I've had some artists get, you know, a little frustrated here and there, but ultimately we're on the same page as producer and artist,
Mhm.
working towards the same vision. And I think that once you get past, you know, the initial like disagreement, if
Mhm.
you could even call it that, once you get past the speed bump, and you just keep that energy and momentum rolling, it works really well. So I really haven't had too many difficult, you know, issues or complications when it
Mhm.
comes to that kind of approach. But yeah, man, I do like it my way.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I know what you mean. And you know, what about when it comes to, you know, your role as a musician and when it comes to the process of creating music with other people?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any differences when it comes to this aspect of your activity? Because obviously, you know, having clashing ideas and being perceptive towards other people's understanding and towards other people's ideas in terms of how things should be done can be, you know, quite a challenging process if you are not, you know, very communicative and open to discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think communication, you said
Yeah.
communicative. I think communication is one of the most crucial components
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to being a songwriter, and then working with other people who have input and ideas. Like in All the Pretty Things,
Mm-hmm.
we typically have each come to the table with a different ideas, be it a guitar idea, a
Mm-hmm.
vocal idea, and we start to build around that.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to give each other equal amount of input, and we're really flexible with you know everyone's voice, because we
Mm-hmm.
want everyone to feel like they contribute, and we want everyone to have a part in the creation process. Sometimes it can be, like I said, a little difficult if it's like, I don't dig that guitar part for the verse, or I don't like that drum pattern there.
Mm-hmm.
But we've all done this for so long. I've been making music for over 25 years, and I think everyone else is pretty much in the same ballpark
Mm-hmm.
with their experience level. So we know what we want and what we don't want. So
Mm-hmm.
people aren't throwing ideas to the table that really don't belong or really don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we try to be as diplomatic as possible. Anytime that there's a great idea, we really support it. And anytime there's an idea that needs more development, we try not to be dismissive. I try not to be dismissive of it. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely want to hear, okay, if the idea is not working, how can we take this and morph it into something that's going to
Mm-hmm.
serve the song, because it's
Mm-hmm.
ultimately all about the song, the end goal, the vision. Like that's where I funnel
Mm-hmm.
my focus to.
You said it so well, and it just reminded me of that saying, which was like something like respectable but not compromising. Which I think it very well describes what you said. Obviously, you have to be respectable and open, but you can't compromise the quality of the product in the end of the day if you don't think
Yeah.
it's good enough, I guess.
Yeah, and man, I have really high standards. And it ties into my personality.
Mhm.
I'm sure, but I really, like I said, I push everyone that I work with hard. Be it the band that I'm in, or the musicians I'm performing with, or the musicians I'm recording.
Mhm.
But as long as everyone's on the same page of we're trying to get to this end vision, this end goal, and
Mhm.
that's where you have to like put your ego aside sometimes,
Mhm.
including mine, and
Mhm.
go, all right, well, this is the right thing. Let's go
Mhm.
with it and make hard decisions and roll.
So well said. Yeah, so well said.